Um, yeah, we were going to talk a bit about um, the National Forest Service update. And so I've got a few slides here, and we'll talk about the electric bike issue shortly, too. That's a separate topic. But I wanted to build off of that discussion about the Great American Outdoors Act and specifically hone in on the U.S. Forest Service because, at least to date, they have been the most uh, publicly facing agency in sharing what projects, what deferred maintenance projects they believe should be priority for this new fiscal year. And they've done a brief kind of public display of that and got public input, whereas the other agencies were still kind of scrambling to get their information. The Park Service has a really good idea on what they want to do in terms of implementing the Great American Outdoors Act, and those are going to be high visibility projects. That's been the mandate and the need. But I'll focus on the Forest Service. So, Brian, I've got my slide up, and let me just make sure we've got we're not quite there yet, huh? So I'll just walk through it real quickly here. As we talked about, the Great American Outdoors Act really is a robust funding mechanism for these next 5 years that will complement the National Forest System Trails Stewardship Act, specifically that portion of the deferred maintenance backlog that many of us on this Zoom meeting care about is, the condition of our trails and our access to federal public lands, be it parks, forests, BLM lands, Fish and Wildlife Service. So of that 1.9 million each year for 5 years that Terry mentioned, the Forest Service is going to get 15%, as he said, and that equates to roughly $285 million each year for the next 5 years. And that's above and beyond the annual appropriations by Congress. So hopefully there won't be any change there, and appropriations will at least continue to stay steady and if not increase on some programs, but this is going to be additive across the board. And 285 million for the Forest Service each year for 5 years can go a long ways to reduce the deferred maintenance backlog. Just to give you some idea here, um, the these funds are directed towards priority deferred maintenance, and which includes two main buckets for the Forest Service: transportation, which is roads primarily, and no more than 35% can be spent on transportation. And then the other bucket is facilities or buildings, non-transportation it was initially called. That's no more than 65% of the annual Great American Outdoors Act funding. So facilities include buildings and other infrastructure. And importantly, trails is actually the second highest need after buildings in that bucket of facilities. And
Randy, I was gonna note that we did struggle with that language, like in the bill, like the transportation to non-transportation assets. At one point, the Park Service basically just said, like, there's no way for us to track all that. Like, it's impossible for us to like be exact. And so we wanted to change that, but then the Senate just kind of passed it. So the agencies are going to like struggle a little bit in deciding how to hit those like benchmarks. But yeah, sorry. Just a
well, no,
little
I think
tidbit.
that's a good thing because obviously a transportation budget could probably swallow all of this money
Yeah.
in 5 years. So,
Oh, we were supportive of the provision, but I was just saying the exact like 50%, like 50, and I don't know what the last percentages were, but the Park Service basically just said, like, can you just say like try to create parity, or like just basically not have a set percentage, because they just said, I don't know how we're going to determine whether exactly 50% of our projects are exact. So that was the only issue. But yeah,
okay.
it's a positive thing to ensure that not all of it goes toward road maintenance or yeah.
No, I think that's important. Good. Thanks for mentioning that. And with the Forest Service, there is an recent estimated backlog for trails, and that's on the order of about $237 million. So getting an extra $285 million each year for 5 years could make a serious dent in the trail maintenance backlog if the Forest Service really puts a lot of effort there. But that's the good news. The Trail Stewardship Act really prods them to do that, work with partners and others to get trail maintenance, deferred maintenance that is done. And another good sign is that the monies that the Forest Service is proposing and will soon forward to Congress here for this current fiscal year, 37% of that facilities money is directed towards trails related projects, about 84 projects in total across all the regions. That to me displays a serious effort by the Forest Service to put a good portion of Great American Outdoors Act money towards deferred maintenance of trails, all really positive signs in the way the Forest Service has been addressing this. And on that first slide that Brian will share, you got the e-bikes one up there, Brian, right now. But on that first slide that Brian will share shortly, there's also a link to the Forest Service website where you can look at that list of trails, or I'm sorry, Great American Outdoors Act projects for this current fiscal year by region and get a sense of what's happening in places you care about for that first year.
Randy, just out of curiosity, could you tell me what, if any, input state horse councils or others will have in helping prioritize some of that? I attended an outdoor recreation roundtable meeting, and it sounded like the Forest Service was going to be sort of soliciting from a number of different constituents for input.
Yes, Julie, great. Yeah, the Forest Service did kind of show us a quick list and then got public comment and gave less than a week for that. But for the next 4 coming fiscal years of this implementation, I'm certain, especially the Forest Service, if not all the agencies, are going to be very open and have, open houses and solicit, proposals for what people, all these different interests consider priority deferred maintenance. In a lot of those places, those kind of lists will probably mesh up quite well. Many of the agencies have some of those lists. I'm sure they haven't thought they'd have funding for 5 years, so they're not complete. And there'll be plenty of opportunities, I'm certain, for that kind of public listening sessions and discussion where we can put our priorities before the agencies. And it doesn't have to be just trails. It can be roads that get us to our public lands and trailheads. It can be bridges, it can be facilities or visitor centers, whatever we care about is all in the realm of this deferred maintenance. So yeah, I guess it's important to know what this act would not fund. It's not going to fund, in most cases, new construction or new things, maybe some realignments or other things for trails, but we're also not going to see them using it for planning purposes or other things like that. It's about getting the work done that's been, deferred for years. So we need to start thinking about all those things, all those bridges we cross and all those trail facilities we want at the trailhead, and that we have adequate parking at the trailheads for our rigs and things like that. That's all part of the picture if it is indeed, could be considered, deferred maintenance.
Randy, I'd also heard briefly that one of the things they might give priority to is improvements that would increase revenues. So in other words, if it's a visitor center or it's a way for them to bring in more income, that might take sort of a top tier and then drive more revenues, which would then help with more maintenance.
Absolutely. And Terry, I thought I heard Terry mention something.
I was just gonna say, I looked up, it just says not less than 65% has to go to non-transportation projects or not. I was just saying that's what the agencies were struggling with, because they're like, how do we ensure that 65% of our projects are non-transportation? Because some projects can even be both, and they were just asking us to have like a broader language, like just try to create parity or so that was what I was referring to. But
okay,
well, hopefully they'll implement it well.
And Randy, you had one more question, Randy, and the person asked, they said, with all the recent fires that we've been seeing, especially this year, and it seemed to be growing, are you envisioning that perhaps we'll see budgets being redirected to firefighting and forest management?
Well, and Terry can answer this too, but we had a big fix in Congress, and Terry was part of that. The Wildfire Disaster Funding Act a couple of years ago ended the fire borrowing as of this past fiscal year. So at least what we've been seeing in the past of Congress, or I'm sorry, not Congress, the agencies like the Forest Service and BLM in a bad fire year, which there have been many just successful years, is borrowing from programs, including recreation and trails, to pay for firefighting costs. Now that we have a FEMA type account I don't know how that's working out, Terry, but the idea is those are quite separate, and we're not going to see any losses coming from the programs. And I'm sure, is that
Yeah.
correct, Terry, your understanding too?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of not our problem now. They took it away from us. Yeah, I mean, we were supportive of the fix. We may have wanted to go about it a little bit differently, but I mean, it's a positive development for the Forest Service, because that was kind of their line of argument for a lot of years was, hey, sorry, we can't, we had a bad fire year, you know, come back to us next year. So that, you know, that argument for them isn't there anymore. But that doesn't, just because we fixed the, you know, funding problem, we still, you know, we're still pushing hard on forest management issues and trying to, you know, treat more timber, because I'm sure that affects you guys. You know, if a forest goes up, you know, it limits, you know, forest activities and trails, and, you know, campgrounds get shut down. And so, I mean, we would love you guys in the future to, you know, to be a bigger part of kind of our forest management discussion, because I mean, it's a hard thing in Congress, and it's sensitive, because I think our Democrats sometimes are just like, it's all climate change and we've just got to address climate change. And and we're kind of like, it's all forest management. But I mean, the fact of the matter is it's both, right? I mean, we understand that we're having hotter, drier, you know, seasons. We're having longer fire season. Like, basically fire season is almost the whole year in some places now. And so, I mean, we understand that's an aspect of it, but we also are not treating enough acres, and not, you know, not thinning and other things. So we will continue to push on that. And frankly, yeah, we would love your guys' input and support on some of that, because it's got to happen. And the Forest Service knows how to manage its forests. Like, they have experts and scientists, but a lot of times they're prevented from doing so through lawsuits, through, you know, other agency actions. So anyway, so it's still a top priority for our committee Republicans to get that addressed.
As it should be. Great. And Craig, to finish off answering your question too, I mean, yes, firefighting in just for the agency each year will consume more and more of the agency's overall budget. We hope it doesn't, you know, start to mean that they're taking away from recreation and trail programs as a result. But the need has been huge, and the restoration is going to be huge as well. And that's what was alluded to before. But yeah, Freddie mentions the forest staff. Yeah, there's going to be more and more attention and more resources to fires. And in terms of maintenance backlog, it only adds more trails and facilities to that backlog if they're in fired, you know, burnt areas. So does that answer your question, Craig, at least in general sense? Okay.
And a lot of times they just shut down the area until it can be repaired. Like, they don't prioritize always the restoration. So
okay, great. Thanks, Craig. And Brian, that slide you have there right now, that's just a quick, it kind of gets to Julie's question here about how can we influence the decision of projects. Our chairman for BCHA just sent out an alert recently talking about ways that we can influence the selection of projects for deferred maintenance. But the key point there, and the rest of this memo explains there's different ways to do that. But I would encourage anybody right now to reach out to, whether it's Park Service, Forest Service, BLM, or other, to find out how they can provide input on deferred maintenance projects. Ask for a list of what they believe are deferred maintenance projects and see if things that are important to you are on that list. And for BCHA and other volunteer organizations to say, hey, we can help do this. We can you know, use our sweat equity to help you get there. So, and there's lots of ways in volunteer agreements and other ways to make that happen. So huge opportunity, and we're at a point now where the agencies are already making up their list for the following fiscal year, FY22, in the next month or so. So it's important to get in front of the agencies now to talk about the priorities. So unless there's questions, I want to move on to a different topic. And this is one that has been perplexing the horsemen and women for many years, but with COVID-19 has been even heightened here. It's just equestrian campsites that are occupied by parties without stock. And the graphic on the left there is just simply to show you the the one-sidedness of this equation right now. We're searching for a solution, and I wanted to appeal to this committee. I'd love for Terry to provide input and use his brain on this issue too. But right now, there isn't a law that prevents people without stock from occupying a horse camp or an equestrian camp. And so all we have is the sign on the right at best, and little hints that, you know, people without stock shouldn't be using our campsites, because we're finding more and more, and I'll show you some data in a second of how big the problem is nationwide. But the law on the left here only is the converse. It only says that this is Forest Service, the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR, about it's illegal for us to bring our animals, you know, unless it's an authorized or posted equestrian camp. So, but the converse isn't true, that people, again, without stock aren't prohibited by the Code of Federal Regulations to occupy our sites, and our people are getting squeezed out left and right. So I'm going to breeze through some data very quickly to give you an idea of the scope of the problem. And we want to start talking about potential solutions, where be they legislative or otherwise. So Craig, Brian, if you could show the next slide here. This is just to give you an idea of a survey that was done early this year by one of our BCH members here in Oregon. And basically, the first question has to do about, do you have concerns about non-equestrians occupying horse camps? Almost 94% of people said, yeah, you know, I disapprove of people taking our camps. The graphics on the right, you know, talk about how far people drive and how many times they've been denied, you know, a campsite with their stock because non-equestrians are occupying them. The numbers there are staggering. And this is a survey. It's not scientific, but it's over 3,400 people that responded nationwide out of 45 states out of the nation's 50. And the vast majority here, at least, see it as an issue and travel great distances to camp with their animals. Okay, next slide, please. So there's just some more data here about, you know, how many people, and again, the number in blue in the upper left there, over 93% have seen non-equestrians occupy a horse camp. You can read these later to get more idea about the depth of the problem here and how many, you know, how often this occurs and in how many places. I'm sure all of us have experienced this at one time or another. And the bottom line is equestrians are having to go elsewhere, and many times there is no other alternative place to go. So yeah, I'll make these slides available, Julie, the whole document for that matter, of the summary of these results, because they are very staggering in their scope. And, you know, when we're displaced, sometimes, as you can see in the graph here, you know, people have to drive a long ways to find an unoccupied horse camp, or they just go home oftentimes. And there's a large percentage of people who end up having to be forced and cancel their trip and go home as a result. There's very few people, when asked, you know, on site, you know, that they were going to leave an occupied campsite after they've already set up their party and they're doing that. And lastly, there's safety concerns. When you've got your stocks in the corral, your horses or mules or whatnot, and there are kids running around, bicycles, motorcycles blasting around, little kids trying to reach in and pet your animals, there's safety concerns. And so that's also touched on in this survey here. And so this
Randy,
last slide gets
for my benefit, can people call ahead and reserve a campsite knowing that they are going to bring their horses with them there?
Yeah, Julie, there's two types. So there's reservable campsites and there's the first come, first serve.
Okay.
This is happening in the data that I haven't shown yet because we're data intensive here for this purpose, but shows that even in the reservable campsites, which you have, if there's a camp host, you can clearly go and say, hey, we have the reservation, this party's here. But in those cases, especially where there's neither a camp host or it's a first come, first serve, we're just largely out of luck. And you're going to rely on the goodwill of the person to move. And in many cases, that doesn't happen.
Thank you.
So
right.
I think that's the last slide I have, but it's just a broad problem. The solution is not clear to me, but I wanted to get a sense from this group about how widely it's shared, how broadly this concern is, important to your constituencies. And if there's a legislative potential solution, a new code of federal regulations that has to be generated, something that gets to both the reservable campsites, the first come, first serve, how they're advertised on the recreation.gov thing, how they're signed, in the field. All these things are variables that have different, ways of improving the situation. But, for a national organization, we certainly would like a national solution that could help our constituents.
Well, Randy, I'll just tell you from the national point of view, we've had at least 3 or 4 calls from a variety of states that have expressed this concern. So we definitely are hearing it in Washington.
And this is the first I've ever heard of it, Randy. So it's interesting topic.
I'm glad you're still here, Terry. Thanks. And yeah, I hope those slides show the scope of the problem, in all those states. And we're talking primarily U.S. Forest Service. Sure, this applies to other agencies, but where you spend the bulk of our time, and there's the bulk of the equestrian campgrounds on national forest lands. It certainly happens at a state and county level too, but clearly we're not in a position to affect those types of solutions in a direct, broad fashion.
So I guess I'll put a call out. Are the members present here from representing state horse councils? What are state horse councils hearing about this issue? Are you getting complaints? I see Jean and I see Bill and I see Gwen. Yay or nay? You hearing about it?
We're not hearing that here in Colorado. Of course, we don't get all those kind of phone calls either.
Okay.
We have a problem here in Michigan with that because if they run short of sites in the non-horse areas, they'll send them over to the horse areas right now. And so we're just in the process of trying to address that with them.
Great. And I'm seeing, comments from New York, Kansas, and other places that they are indeed having many of those similar types of complaints. And that's the working assumption, that it's a pretty broadly shared issue. And perhaps this committee and its work in assistance with AHC can start to kind of maybe hone in on some solutions if they're in the legislative arena, for example.
Good. We've got some comments from Kansas. Obviously, it's a problem there, and members from Oregon are emphasizing what you said as well. It's definitely been an issue. Looks like nationwide.
Hey, Randy, this is Chip from Arizona.
Hey, Chip. Yeah.
Yeah. We have that problem as well. Also, Julie had mentioned the aspects of making reservations ahead of time. So many times when you call in to make a reservation over the phone, they will tell you that they're booked solid, that they've got no openings at all. And number one, there's no requirement that when you call in and make a reservation on it that says that you have livestock. It just says you want to reserve it. And then when you go up there, you find the place is packed with people that don't have any livestock at all. So that's another part of the issue when you can make reservations and there's no requirement that you say you have livestock.
Yeah, and that brings up an important point, Chip. A lot of the reservable campsites, and if we're talking just the world of Forest Service, there's an entity there, a for-profit entity that's managing in a lot of cases those camps on behalf of the Forest Service, a concessionaire. And clearly, if they're not being used completely by people with stock, they're going to make more money and have an incentive to want to, have these sites reservable by anybody who's willing to pay the price. That might be part of the problem. Sure, there's examples of places that we're not using equestrian campsites to their fullest, and that is an issue. But there's a lot of variability, as you're mentioning, Chip, in places and what the system is. I've seen in Reserve America, sometimes it's very clear when you make your online reservation that it says parties must have stock, and you're supposed to put in the number of stock you have there, and there's even a couple little boxes you're supposed to check that you're bringing stock. And for some of the other Forest Service campsites in Reserve America, there's not one mention of it.
Right,
so
that's what we're saying.
Variety, big spread.
So Randy, how do you feel about maybe let's making a small working group or a task force? We'll pick out, 5 or 6 people and maybe we can drill down on this, outside of this meeting.
I would love that and invite that type of thing. This brain trust here would be fantastic to have.
Okay, I'll put out a call, see who we can get to step forward, and we'll form ourselves a little working group.
Okay. And I'm looking at the note here too about Louisiana Lieutenant Governor has developed a partnership, and there's certainly ways that we can use some case studies like that and learn more information. So thanks for that, Julie, too.
Yeah, and I'm thinking we'll probably invite somebody from the concessionaires or other members of the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable. So we've got all the perspectives, and maybe we can come to some consensus on a way that'll be a win-win.
That's great. Okay, good idea. Thank you.
And one more state has had an issue with the horse camps, and that is North Carolina. So it's definitely nationwide and coast to coast. Well, Randy, thank you very much for that update. Let's pivot to the discussion on e-bikes. And if you can just go ahead and kick it off, I will pull up the presentation.
Okay. Well, electric bikes. If you haven't heard about that recently or know what an electric bike is, they might have passed you on the trail and you didn't even know it. So Brian's going to bring up some slides here in a second. I'm going to show a couple examples of electric bikes, but I'm going to talk about the current activities by the federal agencies and what it means for our public lands access, because electric bikes are here to stay. It's not a question of us just digging in our heels and saying no. We're going to have to think of ways of where the appropriate places for electric bikes are to go, how they're authorized, and what kind of public process occurs and how we can provide input. But we certainly aren't going to get in the way of the industry and the e-bike juggernaut that's coming to public lands near you. So I wanted to paint that picture, that of reality, and even put a different perspective on it about the benefits of electric bikes and how they're going to, the potential for creating new opportunities for people to explore and enjoy their public lands that they couldn't do otherwise without the motor assist. So there are benefits, especially for the elderly, people that don't have full abilities. For example, returning veterans from Iraq or Afghanistan who may have been injured and can't really sustain a regular bike ride, but electric bikes open a new world for them to explore their public lands. There's positives about electric bikes that we have to recognize and understand. Because again, they're coming and there are benefits from them. So I wanted to give you some updates. And first, we can define if we need to about the different definitions of what an electric bike is, what it does. But I wanted to show you some pictures first, to get you more familiar with the concept, and then talk about what the primary federal land management agencies are doing right now in terms of changing their policies to accommodate or at least plan for the forthcoming rising popularity of electric bikes. So Brian, when you've got that slide, I'm going to cheat by looking at mine here. I'd be curious to hear from you all too. I certainly want to find information and documentation of conflicts with e-bikes, because they are occurring and they're going to occur with more frequency as more, let's say, inexperienced people venture into the backcountry on bicycles with an electric assist. We'll have people, they're heavier bikes to begin with because of the motor and the battery. Electric bikes typically are in the range of 50 to 60 pounds today, but they're getting smaller in terms of the batteries. And these are lithium-ion batteries that are quite lightweight, rechargeable, and even interchangeable. So you can have a backpack with more batteries in it if you want, and slap them in as your power diminishes. Just checking the comments here to make sure there's nothing there yet. Okay. But there are also, as more people are going to be venturing the backcountry on these things, there's going to be more people who break down. And because of the weight of the bikes and their probably lack of overall fitness for some of folks, we might be the ones that are going to rescue and haul people out, of the woods and the backcountry with electric bike problems. So Julie, if you're working on those slides.
Yep, let me get the slides going first.
I'd appreciate that too. And yeah, there's already Gwen talking about Pennsylvania here and having issues in that state with electric bikes. Can we do, you know, there's a way to raise your hand here. If you go to the reactions at the bottom of the screen here.
Okay, Randy, do you see the slides?
I do. Okay, cool. But is there a way to informally ask people if they know of, you know, if there's issues in their states? Because if there isn't, you know, there will be soon, unfortunately.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll try to get that done while you keep talking.
Okay. Well, so here's just a quick slide. Last fall, I was in Colorado. And, you know, I'm seeing these signs being put up more and more everywhere. In addition to the Carson post on the left and all the different things that are allowed and things are prohibited, this particular trail, you know, has the new no e-bikes sign. So that's what it looks like, you know, in terms of you know, signage on the National Forest System. But they're way behind in being able to post this. In fact, I saw people trespassing with e-bikes on this same forest during that trip. So it's not working. Next slide, please, Brian. And by way of, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Julie. Yeah, the one just prior to that. So here's a picture, you know, of an advertisement, and I love the title. Nothing's out of reach now. That both scares me and makes me wonder who are they marketing here? But that is a standard electric bike. And Julie's asking for a quick hand raise. If you go to that chat button here, oh, I'm sorry, participants, you can raise your hand. And I'm seeing across the board lots of people in various states. Okay. Yeah, Utah, Arizona, Montana, Kansas. Okay. I mean, yeah, this is happening more and more. So thanks for that input, and I'm sure it's ubiquitous. But here's what I'm not concerned about. You know, the elderly couple who, you know, there's even the bike in the back there. I'm sorry, you know, has a wicker basket on there. They're out there enjoying their public lands, I'm sure. They're not out there to tear up the trail, to terrorize the rest of us. This is something that, you know, the garden variety, you know, doesn't frighten me, and they're not going to even maximize the full 20+ miles an hour on their bikes. It's the next picture of an e-bike, Brian, that I'm worried about. This is from a race video, and I don't have, you know, but quickly looking, there is only one legal bike on federal lands at present that's in this picture of 3 bikes. It's the one on the far right, the one that has.
Not very clear, is it?
No, they all look very similar. So the one on the right has a 750 watt nominal engine, or I'm sorry, motor. And the other ones exceed that capacity. So right now on federal public lands, the way their regulations will show briefly here is that 750 watt is the maximum allowable on trails on federal public lands. Well, if you got 1,000 watt and a 2,000 watt bike right there in the picture, that look pretty much like the 750 watt maximum. I don't see how anybody in law enforcement or otherwise is going to be able, when they whiz by, to know what class of bike you have, what wattage it is, and what speeds it's capable of. The 750 watt bike alone is capable of, you know, over 20 miles per hour. So how's that compare? You know, when we ride our horseback, we're going, what, 3-5 miles per hour at most? But I'd say averaging, you know, 3 miles per hour, perhaps. That's a far cry from over 20 miles per hour by just this first tier class of bike. And there's other classes of bikes that are legal that just have a throttle. You don't even have to pedal them. And they could be legal on your, you know, non-motorized trails. Next slide, please, Brian. So the Forest Service has already, you know, been advertising. Here's some, you know, of the bit more larger size e-bikes, but they're really making it quite clear in this PSA, let's call it, that motorized bikes are prohibited on non-motorized trails. Do the legwork. I like that. That's fantastic. The Forest Service is saying, hey, you know, they can't be on non-motorized trail because they have a motor. And that's a subtlety that's lost on the Department of Interior right now. And we'll get into that in just a second. So next slide, please, Brian. As mountain bikes are coming on forests like the Tahoe National Forest, and, you know, Terry, if Tom McClintock becomes the ranking member in the House Natural Resource Committee, this is near and dear to his district. The Tahoe National Forest last year without any public input or discussion, opened up over 130 miles of our non-motorized trails to electric bikes. These are non-motorized trails with an electric motorized bike and no public process. Even our local chapter for Backcountry Horsemen wasn't consulted, and they work and maintain some of the very trails that were open to electric bike use. So, you know, suffice to say, we weren't happy with that behind closed doors, you know, pilot project that was never publicly announced. So in the absence of you know, any following policy on the Forest Service part, next slide, please, Brian. Just wanted to let you know that we had to respond in a very, take a tough physical stance. So we had other partners, the Wilderness Society being a key one in this case, because they shared our concerns and have been a long-going partner for many years. And by the way, the Wilderness Society was the other third partner in the National Forest System Trails Stewardship Act from 2016. It was AHC, Backcountry Horsemen, and the Wilderness Society that helped move that bill. But here we told the forest supervisor at the Tahoe in no uncertain terms that his move to authorize e-bikes was illegal. And when they didn't respond at all to our request to cease and desist, we took them to court in the federal district court in Eastern California. So the good news there is that we settled that lawsuit with the Forest Service. They rescinded their decision, and they're currently going to an environmental assessment process to look at a portion of those trails to be suitable for motorized electric bike use. That's at least the process they should be following from the start, which they didn't do. And so we have to engage in that public process and weigh in at that stage, but at least there's other remedies if they continue to violate their laws and policy. So on the national front, and yeah, we have a chat here too. Next slide, please, Brian. There are different classes of bikes. I wasn't going to get into that right now, but even the ones that are legal, the three classes really can't be distinguished from each other. So what's happening in terms of how it's affecting us nationally and trails that you care about? The Department of Interior issued a secretarial order last year, basically saying that the agencies don't have to classify electric motorized bikes as a motorized use. That defies logic, but that was the thought process. And basically that e-bikes are to be allowed, or the term was shall, which is very clear that they will do so, allow e-bikes where other types of bicycles are allowed. And we're concerned about the public process again, and so what that secretarial order did was compel the agencies to enter into a rulemaking process to actually change their policies to say that an electric bike with a motor is not a motorized trail use, which again defies logic. So the agencies replied. I list two here, but there's also the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I think the Bureau of Reclamation too issued similar policies. The issue with the National Park Service is, well, the good news is there's not many mountain bike trails in our national parks. There's several exceptions, but by and large, most national parks don't have mountain bike trails. But in this case, the authority lies with the superintendent. They can simply adjust what's called the superintendent's compendium, and without public process, just say electric bikes are allowed on trails where bicycle use is allowed, and even service roads, which our folks use extensively. And I mentioned an example here on the Buffalo National River, where our local chapter there is concerned because those are dirt service roads they've been using as equestrian trails for a long time, that now they'll have to look over their shoulder for electric bikes, approaching quickly. The Bureau of Land Management, which owns the majority of lands, federal public lands in the western 11 states, including in Alaska too, basically says, sure, we can add them to non-motorized trails, but we have to do a public process. So at least there's an opportunity for us to chime in. So more to come. These regulations are being finalized as we speak. And there'll be a Federal Register notice coming soon, if it hasn't already, announcing this final decision about the Department of Interior agencies and their change in policy. Brian, the next slide, please. And then switching over to Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Forest Service. Of course, they're not in the Department of Interior. The Forest Service did something a little bit like not a full rulemaking proposal, but proposed to change their manual on travel management. Public comments are due today. So once I leave this conference, I'll be finishing up BCHA's comments. But I'm really tickled pink that our friends at the Forest Service, I believe, largely did the right thing here. They will continue to define electric bikes as a motorized trail use. That's important for a number of reasons, including that it's going to require a public process where they're looking to add electric bikes to non-motorized trails that we all use. But clearly there's some need for improvements in these draft changes. But by and large, I think we can live with what the Forest Service is proposing. In fact, it's exactly what we asked for in our lawsuit against the Tahoe National Forest. If you're going to do such a thing, you need to do a public process, invite the stakeholders to the table, do a site-specific analysis, and follow the National Environmental Policy Act. Usually an environmental assessment would suffice. And a couple forests are moving forward on doing just that. They're listed here on this slide in California and New Mexico. And the good news is on the Lincoln National Forest in southern New Mexico, we submitted comments with our coalition partners, including the Horse Council in that state, to say that we objected to sharing non-motorized trails with electric bikes. And the Forest Service listened to us and they reversed their decision. And now the non-motorized trails will not be proposed to have electric bike use. So I posed the question, it is coming to a forest near you. If you're in North Carolina on the Pisgah, it's happening. It's happening right underneath your nose. And maybe, Ken, that was what you were mentioning earlier. It's happening in Colorado, California, Arkansas, many states. And so it's just a matter of time that you're going to have to contend with this. And Gwen mentioned Pennsylvania and others. Is that the last slide, Brian, here on electric bikes? Or Julie, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Julie's running that, so. Looks like the last one.
Okay, so in summary, there's a lot happening on the front of policy changes by this administration, some good, some bad. I think the Forest Service situation is to be seen because the folks that Cliff and I met with for People for Bikes, for example, Julie was part of that, and Brian is part of that meeting last year. The proponents of electric bikes, for example, really don't like the Forest Service changes. They want the Forest Service to match what the Department of Interior did and somehow assume, e-bikes don't have a motor and shouldn't be treated as such. There could be a change depending on this election about what are the next steps the Forest Service takes and to what degree the secretarial order stands up here for electric bike use. So again, there's the positive things about electric bike use and what they can bring to the American public. We're going to have to learn to get along with electric bikes and make those decisions on a site-specific basis about what trails that we don't use that we think are perfectly adequate for e-bike use. And we'll have to fight for those trails that we do use. And of course, the bottom line for horsemen and women is the safety concern, the user conflict, the fact that our horses are going to be frightened. If you're already having issues with mountain bikes, this is the bigger, faster mountain bike. They're advertised, in a way, e-bikes are, that it's you and a lot faster on your bike. So it's the speed and speed kills. And we have a growing documentation that we've been using in our comment letters about the conflict issue, about the safety concerns. And we want to continue to document with your help issues of accidents, problems, and things like that we can point to as motorized trail use, mixed use doesn't work for equestrians in most cases. So I want to put that out there for folks to send me your examples of where that's happened, where the conflicts have occurred, and any solutions that you see short of, trying not to share mixed use trails with electric motorized bikes.
Great, Randy, thank you very much for that. And in the interest of time, we are running right up at an hour and a half. So let's go ahead and Cliff, if you're on, we'll take up the public and private land dispute issue that you've been working on.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to make one point. The American Horse Council has submitted letters to the regulatory agencies involved in this e-bike issue. We will continue to be involved in this process as it moves forward. Unfortunately, it is not a legislative issue. It is regulatory. So, and it came directly from the secretary. And so until there is an administrative change at the top, e-bikes are going to continue to be a part of the conversation, as Randy mentioned. So, again, to Randy's point, please inform the American Horse Council of any evidence you have of e-bikes causing a problem on trails, specifically for equestrian participant trail users, and we'll collect those and move those forward. But right now, we're still speaking anecdotally about a lot of things, and it cuts into the significance of our conversations. To my topic for today, the American Horse Council has been receiving calls over the last year and a half since our last meeting about a variety of different private, public land use disputes between equestrians, horse organizations, training facilities, medical facilities, medical use, and public space, whether that be at the municipal, state, or federal level. In particular, at the municipal level, we've seen issues in Missouri, Florida, California, Louisiana, and those issues we have incorporated the state horse councils in those as much as we can, but unfortunately, because the horse council doesn't have a state presence, a local presence across the whole country, we've been forced into a monitoring position as opposed to being able to take direct action. Those issues have crossed the spectrum, and at the basis level, all of these issues have had to do with keeping horse riders safe, horses and equestrians safe. The issues in Missouri involved the county park system excluding horse access on equestrian trails because of complaints from runners who had adopted those trails. This is pre-COVID, but had started utilizing those trails for cross-country running. And there had never been a safety dispute. Unfortunately, there had been complaints about manure that steamrolled into a horse ban. All of that had been done relatively in private, and without the ability for the public to speak up and defend equestrian use of those trails, a PATH certified facility that was performing equine assisted services lost their ability to take riders outside of a ring. It is frustrating for them, that issue. They are going to have to wait for an election to see to open up the possibility for a change there. And that type of engagement, local engagement, is at issue for all of our issues. Another issue, just as an example, in California, it involves a national organization called Coast Keepers, who is utilizing a predatory litigious action to muscle equine facilities out of the county, basically, by utilizing the Waters of the United States clean water type environmental bills. And California has stronger regulations than we have even at the federal level. Coast Keepers is implying that horse operations, and there are large operations, in this particular community, over 150 animals per farm sized operations. And those facilities are being fined and pressured into making incredibly costly changes for the sake of streams that feed into the Pacific Ocean. The evidence that the horses are causing any kind of environmental damage is very questionable at best. But because of communities not having a strong representative voice on local councils, the town council in this particular county governing this facility caved rather than going to court. And so without having any opportunity for state advocacy efforts to take effect, utilizing political connections and making their voice heard, being able to make their voice heard, a backroom deal was cut that basically made all of these horse operations follow incredibly costly renovations and waste removal protocols. And we had a call last week about this, and they think they're identifying opportunities to dispose of waste, but it is going to be very, very expensive. Anybody that's ever had to haul manure before can relate to that. So we have another situation in Florida with trail access. And then in Louisiana, we have a FAA dispute about low-flying crop dusters buzzing a training facility. And again, at the federal level, the regulations are fairly open, but it takes local action to keep these issues from becoming precedent. And in the Louisiana situation, there is a lawsuit involved. So some of the details are a little hazy because of the nature of that lawsuit. But, trying to get planes, it seems like a fairly intuitive decision to make, that planes are potentially hazardous to horses. But that distinction is hard to come by. And so I guess I wanted to give you an update on what the Horse Council is witnessing around the country, the nature of these disputes. We are going to continue to follow these and assist in any way that we can. I will highlight that majority of these issues are happening in states that don't have strong horse councils. And so these individuals don't have an entity to reach out to between them and the American Horse Council, which, again, I reach out, or I appreciate all the work that you state Horse Council members are doing. And I hope that this is a strong reminder as to why your position and why your efforts are so greatly needed. If anybody ever has any questions or any experiences that they want to share that are like that, please feel free to reach out to Horse Council anytime, and I can answer any questions if you'd like to get into any more specifics.
I don't see any questions in chat, but I recommend that anybody who does have questions about these land dispute issues, especially at the state level, to get in touch with Cliff. It's something that's really been percolating the past year and a half, as he said. All right, thanks a lot, Cliff. All right, so we're wrapping up the agenda here, coming up to one of the last items. We've got other business. So I will hand it off to Chairman Huffines to see if he can call out new business or the committee.
Okay. Just to kind of recap, what I heard from Randy and Cliff, and with regard to our public land use, the multi-use, the threats that we currently have are cannibalization of funding, but it seems like we're getting that covered with the mandate. So our trails are going to be covered, provided we can get those funds out and we can get the departments out to work. And so that's a big win for this year, right, Randy? This whole notion of electric bikes is going to be the upcoming big issue of the next decade. And how do you mitigate the speed of these vehicles on the same trail as hikers and horsemen? So that seems like a major issue. And then Cliff, the continual threat from environmental groups with regard to any kind of livestock operation, including, equestrian facilities. So those seem to be the big ones at this point in time. So, if there's any new business in addition to that, let's bring it forward. Or are there things that we want to try to work towards or develop a committee for in addressing these issues that have been discussed today?
So Craig, I believe there's actually, and Cliff confirmed this, we might be forming a working group on these public-private land dispute issues and looking for people to actually weigh in on the issue. And that would come under the umbrella of this committee, obviously.
Brian,
Yeah.
The board has approved the formation of that group. We just are waiting till after the conference to get it started, but we will be calling out for volunteers to serve on that group.
Good.
And Randy, I remember at one time, one of our meetings, we were discussing collaborative partnerships with other industry groups, camping groups, hiking groups. corporates like REI, do they have similar concerns as we do with regard to this multi-use competition with motorized vehicles?
And I'll ask Brian too with the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, but my guess there, Mr. Chairman, is that I know the American Hiking Society does and shares our concerns. They actually signed on to our public comment letter for the Tahoe National Forest most recently here. But in terms of the industry, I think they're going to be careful about this because clearly there's an industry for electric bikes alone, some of which are being made by current bicycle manufacturers in this country. And then the motors being made by others, the batteries being made by yet another industry. That's where it gets pretty complex. So I don't see groups like the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable getting in the way or taking a position probably one way or the other. But Brian, is that your read too?
Yeah, the OR tends to focus mainly on legislative issues. So making sure that we have funds for the backlog maintenance of public trails and conservation projects is their main focus. And obviously working with the agencies to make sure that these big bills are actually implemented in the proper way.
But Craig, I will add that we had a really, I thought, a good conversation with People for Bikes. Randy attended that, Cliff and I, and it was quite interesting that they have some concerns about e-bikes themselves. And so one of the things we really wanted to do first and foremost was get out an educational campaign to talk to people about how to safely and use good manners on trails and ways that we could just educate people that you can't zoom up behind a horse and then not expect him to react. That's one of the things we've been discussing is what's a good PSA we could run, to get that message out there.
How do you mandate speed limits on backcountry trails with multi-use? Unless we require these bikes to have GPS readers that upload and track their speeds, into the department, that's not going to happen. But it seems like we could use some help because of our numbers on a variety of fronts, whether it's assuring ourselves spots in a camping zone for our horses and livestock, or whether it's trying to come up with solutions for this multi-use problem that we're going to be having. It's coming. So as part of our working group, Julie, I guess, it seems like it would require strategy, in touch pointing each of those problems. And in that strategy, where are the partners that give us numbers in a louder voice? Because I'm not sure how loud we are. We got a loud guy with Randy who does a great job of, he doesn't have enough hours in the day to cover it all. And Cliff, you and Brian don't either. So just curious as to when we get in this working group, do we need some strategy work to find our partners?
I definitely agree with you about that, Craig. I think we should maybe target a couple of other coalitions that are out there, other organizations, and just have some one-on-one conversations and see where they are and if we can enlist them to consider working with us.
All right. Very good.
Brian,
excellent.
Is there any other business?
Yeah. That is other business. So
right.
I believe we've wrapped that up. Mr. Chairman, do you see any reason to go into executive session at this point?
Welcome it. Have a motion to go to executive session.
Anybody want to approve that motion? Second.
Raise your hand, Holly. Motion to
All
go
right,
to
we are
executive
going to
session.
move to an executive session. For those of you who are not members of the Recreation Trails Committee, please sign out. This will be a very small meeting of about 5 or 6 of us.